Good afternoon, everyone. It is good to see you all. We are exactly halfway through the quarter today. So, yay. Good job for everyone for making it this far. So today we are finishing up our second unit on the pre-modern Middle East and Horn of Africa. So we've had our quiz. We're all the way down at the bottom of this page with the Crusades. So we're going to talk about the Crusades today. And then starting next Monday, we're going to start a unit on the modern Middle East and Horn of Africa. We're going to start out with the Ottoman Empire, and Dr. Kuru is going to come and talk to us about that. He's very funny, so you guys will enjoy it. And so here you can kind of see what our plan is for where we're going to be in the future. So no more quizzes for a couple of weeks. You don't have to worry about that for a while. However, not this Friday, but the following Friday, there is a short creative assignment. A short creative assignment where you are going to basically pick an era and a region of the pre-modern Middle East that you think is interesting, and you're going to basically write me a short story about your experiences as a person at that time. You're going to tell me when and where you are. You're going to tell me what life is like, and you're going to tell me about some sort of challenge that you're facing as a pre-modern person and how you're planning to deal with it. So you can try to kind of think your way into the perspective of a pre-modern person from the Middle East or Horn of Africa, and just, tell me about it. There is a more detailed kind of description and rubric on Canvas available for you, but this is basically the foundation of this little thing. This you're going to turn in on Canvas, and hopefully you will enjoy this more than having yet another quiz. Okay? Any questions about this? Okay. All right, so as we get started, we want to remember what Dr. Worku talked to us about last time with the pre-modern Horn of Africa. So tell your neighbor what you remember. What are some of these stories about how Judaism, Christianity, and/or Islam came to the pre-modern Horn of Africa? Tell your neighbor what you remember.
Um, I know.
Okay. What do you guys remember? What's the main story we talked about how Judaism got started in the Horn of Africa? Does anyone remember the story or any piece of that story? What do you guys think? Caleb.
Um, FEMA hears the owl rates of the ruler Solomon, buys and all this treasure and whatnot. So she goes up, sees it. Usual thing happens, just considering Solomon's character, and they have a kid together. Eventually, it goes back to him, is like dead, all good. You can tell the officials and the priests are unhappy with him being there, and so he's like, "You have to leave." So he takes a group of priests with him. They may or may not steal the Ark of the Covenant and go back to Ethiopia.
Yes, exactly. So, according to the story, the Queen of Sheba and Solomon have a child. This child ends up eventually stealing the Ark of the Covenant and taking a bunch of priests with him and taking them back to Ethiopia. And that is how Judaism gets started in Ethiopia, according to this common story. We also looked at how Christianity came to the Horn of Africa and about the fact that Christianity, like, there's the story about how Christianity got there and when Christianity got there, and then there's the reality. Do you guys remember what we learned from those two inscriptions of King Ezana of Aksum? Does anybody remember, like, what we got from those? Okay, so we saw that in his earlier inscription, he clearly is not a Christian. He is referring to all of these other gods. He's talking about doing human sacrifice, all these things like this. In his later inscription, it seems like some kind of shift has happened because now he's using all this Christian-ish language, but he seems to be very much acting like the Christian God is basically going to do the same stuff for him that the previous polytheistic gods would do, right? It's all about military victory and the gods giving him military victory. So you get that kind of interesting thing going on. And he's all the way in, I believe, the 4th century. So stories that push Christianity in Ethiopia all the way back to the 1st century, it's kind of like, I don't know. How about Islam? Does anyone remember how Islam probably gets started in the Horn of Africa? Has to do with the word hijra. Does anyone know what a hijra is? Yeah. Yeah, pilgrimage or like movement of people for a religious purpose. Yeah. Yes.
So, they had a, they wanted to keep the, pressures, they went from Arabia to Ethiopia. And, they came back after the land was more settled.
Yes. So we learned about how originally Muhammad is around Mecca, right? But the people in Mecca are like not liking that he's there because they're polytheistic and he's questioning what they're doing. And so some of Muhammad's followers go to Ethiopia. So that seems to be maybe how Islam gets started in the Horn of Africa. All right. So today we are going to talk about the Crusades. We're going to start by introducing the Crusades, what they are, what's going on. Then we're going to talk in a little more detail about the First Crusade, which is what you guys read about for today, and do the first half of our activity. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the Second and Third Crusades. The Third Crusade is probably the most famous crusade, has Salah ad-Din, Richard the Lionheart, some of these figures. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, and then we'll do our second half of the activity. So that's our plan for today. Now, as we approach the Crusades, who has heard of the Crusades before this class? Who's heard of the Crusades? Okay, most people have heard of the Crusades. Who has actually had a class in school at some point that went into the Crusades in any kind of detail whatsoever? Very small number of people. Okay, yes. So this is why we're going to talk about the Crusades a little bit today. As we talk about the Crusades, we want to remember that our kind of goal in this class, we want to empathize with people's experiences and understand their choices, but we also want to be able to ethically evaluate what they are up to. So we're going to start by introducing the Crusades. What are the Crusades? The Crusades are a series of religious, or at least supposedly religious, wars, supported in Europe by the Roman Catholic popes and led by various European rulers against the powers of the Middle East, supposedly for control of Jerusalem, although we're going to see that's not always how it actually ends up. The First Crusade happens around 1096 AD, and then the end of the Crusader era is going to be around 1291. But during this period of time from 1096 to 1291, there are a whole ton of crusades. Now, before we get into specifics about the First Crusade, we want to introduce who are the people involved, who is going to get caught up in this situation. During this time period, there are a lot of different Muslim kingdoms and caliphates. So there are a bunch of Arabic caliphates, Islamic caliphates, like for example, let me get my laser pointer going. The Umayyads are over here in North Africa, the Fatimids in Egypt. We've got the Ayyubids. We've got other groups. So there are a lot of these different Islamic groups with Arabic elites, basically. There are also quite a few Turkish Islamic powers, which are coming at things from a slightly different direction. In particular, the Seljuks are a big deal during this time. They sometimes have all this area here. So there's also lots of kind of smaller groups of Seljuks in here who are semi-independent from the larger Seljuk Sultanate, but they're very much in play during this time. Also, after 1250, the Mamluks are here in Egypt, and they will also be very much part of the crusading situation. Now, of the various Islamic powers, some of them are more Shia Muslim, some of them are more Sunni Muslim. Do you guys know what the difference is? I mean, there's a lot of like trickle-down differences of this. But basically, the difference between Sunni and Shia has to do with ideas of who should be kind of in charge in the religion. Should it be people who are biologically related to Muhammad, or should it be people who are kind of elected as being qualified as leaders? That's just a very kind of general explanation of what that is. So, and then there are a lot of kind of things about the tradition that are a little bit different depending on which one of these you go for. All right. Sometimes these different groups are at war with one another because having the same religion does not mean that you necessarily get along. You're still going to struggle over resources. You're still going to struggle over trade routes. You're still going to struggle over a variety of policies. So all this is happening. Also, during this time, these groups are under pressure from the Mongols who are over here farther to the east. So in Central Asia and farther to the east in Asia, there are a lot of Mongol powers, and they're quite interested in some of this area. Who else is in play during the crusading period? The Byzantine Empire is also in play. So we talked on the second day of class about how the Roman Empire ended up splitting into two halves. There was the kind of Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire becomes the Byzantine Empire. Okay? The official religion of this empire is Orthodox Christianity, led by the Patriarch of Constantinople. So instead of answering to the Pope in Rome, they have their own patriarch in Constantinople. It's basically a similar job. And the Byzantine Empire, they're under pressure from every direction. The Europeans are pressuring them, the Mongols are pressuring them, the Islamic powers are pressuring them, everybody is pressuring them. And so they're not in a terribly great situation at this point. They're gradually losing ground, they're gradually losing power. However, as you can see, they're still holding on to Anatolia, modern Turkey, and this part here of Greece and a little bit of Europe. The third set of major players in the Crusades are the kingdoms in Europe. There are many, many, many different kingdoms in Europe during this time. They are all at least supposedly Roman Catholic and supporting the Pope, but this often doesn't seem to be playing out very well. Sometimes you have certain kings who will even try to set up alternate popes so that they can still say they're supporting the Pope, even though they don't like the guy who's currently the Pope down in Rome. And they're all fighting each other. They're having they're basically like a bunch of rats in a sack during this period. They're just all fighting each other all of the time. During this time, there's another issue, and that is they're having good weather. There haven't been plagues recently. And so we can tell archaeologically and textually there was a big population boom during this period. There were a lot of people there. Everybody's kind of recovering from the last round of the bubonic plague. Like suddenly there's this big boom in population. And this is playing into this issue where they're constantly at war with one another. Because the more people there are, that doesn't mean there are going to be more resources. Okay? Note especially the powers of France. The Kingdom of France is here. And England is going to be in play. And then here is the Germany's called at this point the Holy Roman Empire. Basically, the Pope will name a Holy Roman Emperor who's like supporting him and helping him. And so the popes and the Holy Roman Emperors have a very kind of, when it's going well, they have a symbiotic relationship. Sometimes it does not go well. But anyway, these are the kind of three major powers to keep an eye on from Europe. Any questions about this so far? Okay, let's talk about the First Crusade. Now, the First Crusade, it's supposedly going to be about Jerusalem, right? Well, let's then talk about what was going on with Jerusalem before the First Crusade. What's our kind of setup to this situation? Initially, the area is ruled by the Islamic Fatimid Caliphate, which was centered in Egypt. A caliph is basically the chief Islamic civil and religious ruler who's regarded as a successor to Muhammad. But there can be multiple caliphs at one time in different places. Okay. So at first, they're in charge of the region, and things are pretty peaceful. Things are pretty good. There are a lot of different people living in this area. There are people who are Greek Orthodox, people who are Catholic, people who are Jewish, people who are Zoroastrian, people who are Muslim, people who are following local religions. They're all living in the region, and people from all of these groups have been here for hundreds of years already at this point. It's a huge mix of people. Also, Jerusalem, even in the medieval period, was a huge tourist attraction. People wanted to go to the place where Jesus had been, where David had been, this place where there's a very important mosque. They want to go to this place for as religious pilgrims. And so there's constantly people coming from all over the Jewish, Christian, Islamic world to visit the city. Now, while not everybody always gets along, things are relatively peaceful during this time. The Fatimids are interested in, keeping the peace in the area, having things be okay. However, during this time period, the Seljuks of Rum, who are an Islamic Turkish power, are busy expanding their territory. They take Jerusalem and a lot of the coastline of Canaan away from the other Muslim powers. And in particular, this becomes an issue because they treat the Christian pilgrims who are coming to Jerusalem very badly. And some of these people are quite influential. And so they complain to the people back in Europe about what's going on. They're talking about what's going on. In 1071, the Seljuks also go and they attack the Byzantine Empire, which used to be up in here, right? And they take away part of Anatolia and all of Syria away from the Byzantine emperor, a guy named Alexios Komnenos. Emperor Alexios then also writes to the Pope and he says, hey, I've got a Christian empire over here. I mean, we've got a lot of differences. We've had a lot of conflicts in the past about theology and other things, but hey, I need some help against the Seljuks. So he has also asked for help. Now, if we just paused here, do you guys think it would be reasonable for some European power or another to do something in the region to come in support of somebody? Do you think that might be okay, theoretically? Maybe. Well, unfortunately, it could have been okay, I guess, but then things just go terribly wrong and stay terribly wrong, okay, for the next 200 years. So Pope Urban II gets this letter from Emperor Alexios Komnenos of the Byzantines, and he decides this should be a religious war. We're going to get people involved by making this a religious war. He calls on all Christian rulers to go and retake Jerusalem from the Muslims. Now, here we should already be having a little pause, because had Jerusalem belonged to the Byzantine Empire? It had not. So there had been apparently, he's doing this in response to a letter asking for help from Alexios of the Byzantine Empire, but he's making it about Jerusalem. Admittedly, the Seljuks are doing stuff in Jerusalem that is not okay, but this is already seeming like we're maybe a little confused about exactly what we're doing here. So he decides we're going to go retake Jerusalem, and we're also maybe going to help Alexios. Many rulers, especially from France and southern Italy, get ready to go. Now, it's quite notable when you read the list of these names, and if you know anything about the history of the time, some of these rulers of France and southern Italy are well known for not being pious, for not really caring about the Christian faith. Because they're there with 4 different wives and, murdering people to get the kingship and all this kind of stuff. Why do you think they would want to be involved in this? Tell your neighbor, why would people who aren't really caring about the Christian faith, why would they want to be part of a crusade? Tell your neighbor what you think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah. I mean, it's a remedy, right? It's a remedy. Yeah. It's not so much.
Okay, what do you guys think about this? Why might these European rulers who aren't actually, following the Christian faith, why would they want to be part of a crusade? Why would they do that? Yeah.
At the time, we're starting to get more into the idea of the right of divine rule. So I mean, making Jerusalem the center of all Abrahamic faiths. I mean, it's a powerful symbol of authority, saying that we're the rightful inheritors of the right to rule over all people. So.
Okay, so they're like, hey, even if we personally aren't interested in changing our behavior towards Christianity, we do think this would be something that would really show that we're powerful, that we have the right to rule, that we are, we can take Jerusalem, and then it doesn't matter that I have children with 16 different women and I'm married to only 4 of them and murdered my brother to be king. I'm going to do this great deed for God and then I'll be forgiven. And so that could be part of it. Why else might they? Yeah, Haley.
I'm assuming tourism means lots of trade. If you can get to reap the benefits and all that.
Okay, yes. So they're also interested in the money. Yes, absolutely. You get the benefit of trade. Also, while you're over there fighting people, you can loot all their stuff, right? You can just steal all their stuff. So you can get some money. Any other reason they might be involved? Yes, Malcolm.
So the area of Valentin known for the resources we have, and it's also a trade route. Like we have lots of trading routes from all over the world. So it's gonna be super strong country if you had the power over there.
Yes, so you get that control of trade, these international trade routes that stretch across 3 continents. You get all this access to resources. There's also, they are kind of interested in, imagine that you're a prince from France, okay? And you have 5 older brothers. Are you probably going to get to be king of France? Most likely not, unless you are good with the assassination thing, which some of them were. But if you go over there to the Holy Land, you could set up your own little kingdom. You could be a king. So some of them are also definitely thinking about that. They're like, hey, we're never going to get to be on top over here in Europe. Maybe over there we can. All we have to do is, kill tens of thousands of people and steal all their stuff and burn their cities down, and we can be powerful. Anyway, so we've got some people who are involved, who have a variety of motives for being involved, okay? And then we also have some priests who are going around and stirring up the ordinary people of Europe, the illiterate people of Europe, who are entirely dependent on these random priests for information about what's going on in the Holy Land, okay? And they're going around stirring up these people and being like, we're going to fight for God. So, for example, Peter the Hermit, who is one of those pilgrims to Jerusalem who got mistreated by the Seljuks, and he genuinely did get horribly mistreated. I don't want to minimize that, but his response was to go back to Europe and recruit 20,000 men, women, and children with 0 fighting experience to basically walk to the Holy Land and try to fight the Turks. As you can imagine, this does not go well. Okay? And so this is kind of what's going on here with the First Crusade. So in 1096, four different crusading armies sail from Europe to the Middle East without really coordinating with one another about what they're doing or with the Byzantine emperor, whose letter had been like supposedly the reason that the Pope got involved in the first place. So perhaps about 100,000 people in total. Many of them are clearly there for the plunder, because as soon as they get to the Middle East, some of them sort of pause and are like, hey, the Byzantine Empire seems rich. Maybe we should just attack them and take their stuff. So the Byzantine Empire is now having to fight off the Crusaders as well as the Seljuks. Some of them don't even bother to even head towards Jerusalem. They just set up new kingdoms for themselves in other parts of the Middle East. I'll show you a map in a second. And finally, the Crusaders who kind of stayed on task in 1099, they take Jerusalem. And their reaction to taking Jerusalem is to kill all the non-Christians in the city. Whether they're Turkish Muslim, whether they're Arabic Muslim, whether they're Zoroastrian, whether they're following local religion, whether they're Jewish, they just kill them all. Okay? And if you're a Christian heretic, you might of some like obscure sect, you're kind of, yeah, I don't know. How fast can you talk and explain that you really follow Orthodox Christianity? At the end of this First Crusade, the Crusaders have established four Catholic Crusader states in the Middle East. So they have a kingdom centered on Jerusalem down here, one centered on Tripoli, one on Antioch, and one on Edessa. Look at this map for a second. Does it seem like most of the Crusaders stayed on task about the Jerusalem thing? They're just like the people going up to Edessa, you're just like, and Antioch, you're like, what even excuse are you going to give to people? Like, you're obviously just here for the power and the plunder. How in the world are you going to sell this to your relatives back home? Well, your relatives back home don't have a map of the Middle East, so they don't know that if you have a kingdom in Edessa, that's nowhere near where you said you were going. Anyway, after the first crusade, there are about 7 more major crusades with multiple rulers going, with the Pope calling for them. And there are also many smaller crusades of like just one ruler at a time between 1102 and 1275. So we're getting these waves of people coming over here looking for largely for power and plunder. Any questions about this so far? It's not a pretty picture, right? All right, so now we're going to do the first half of our activity. So you guys read, based on your last name, some different accounts of the First Crusade. Some of you guys read a European account by Fulcher of Chartres. Some of you guys read an Islamic account by Ibn al-Athir. And some of you read the kind of Byzantine account by Princess Anna Komnena. So what I'd like you guys to do is, last names A through E, who read Fulcher of Chartres, come to the first 2 tables. If you did Ibn al-Athir's, go to the 3rd and 4th rows. If you did Anna Komnena, go to the last 2 rows. Once you've gotten to those rows, discuss with the other people who read your reading the answers to the questions here on the front. So like, what was this about? What do we learn about the First Crusade? How does the writer feel about the other groups involved in the Crusade? Why did they say that the Crusade is happening? And how do you think the writer's biases may have impacted their version of events? So I'll let you guys talk to each other about this for a while, and then we'll come all together and compare the perspectives. So please move to the appropriate spot.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see what we learned about these different perspectives. They're all quite punchy when you read them. Um, so let's start with Fulcher of Chartres from Europe, who was an eyewitness of the First Crusade from the European perspective. So um what would you guys say, like, how does the crusade start according to Fulcher of Chartres? Like, what is it for? How does he describe it? Yes.
Well, in the reading, it talks about how Pope Urban II was frustrated with the way that Christianity was being treated in Europe, both by external forces, but also like internal conflict within the church. And so, I guess when he saw that Jerusalem, according to the writer, was like, being taken, he wanted to sort of reclaim it and bring back Christianity to like its original place.
Yes, yes. So he's talking about what the Pope is doing and how the Pope is setting this whole thing up as we need to restore Christianity and the Holy Land. And that both means rescuing the holy places and Christians from non-Christians, but it also means making sure that it's the right kind of Christianity. So he's getting in a little dig at the Greek Orthodox Church of the Byzantine Empire and of the region as well. So he's not necessarily in favor of them. Okay. So this is why he describes this as happening. How does Fulcher of Chartres talk about other groups of people? Yeah.
Well, for the Byzantines, or the Greek Orthodox, they're basically heretics, but they're still Christian. They're just misguided Christians, so we'll help them out. But as opposed to the Seljuk Turks, and any other group that lives in the area, no matter what they are, they're just pagans and demon worshippers. They worship idols. They have all these bad things. They have to be destroyed.
Yes. So on the one hand, he talks about the Byzantines as just kind of misguided Christians, kind of not, they need to be helped back to the knowledge of the truth. But the Muslims of the region, yeah, he really goes in on them. He's saying stuff like, oh, what a disgrace if a race so despicable, degenerate, and enslaved by demons should thus overcome a people endowed with faith in Almighty God. It's just like, okay, all right. This is the kind of way that he's talking. What kinds of stuff happens according to his account? Anything that jumped out at you that he described? Yeah.
They talks a very long time about the sieging Antioch. And it comes down to basically that God helps them get a traitor inside the city, and is ultimately the reason why they can conquer Antioch is because God gave a message to one of the Turks on the inside. It's like, I am telling you to open the gates and let people into, and he does so, and they take the city. It's like 2-year siege or something like that.
Yes. And let's look at the map for a second. Antioch. This close to Jerusalem? Like, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? So they besiege Antioch for 2 years. And then he has this whole story about how God wanted them to take Antioch because he sets up this situation so they can miraculously take the city. Okay. Any other events that he talks about that jumped out at you guys? I want to point out one thing. Oh yeah, go for it.
I was gonna say, he did mention very briefly that they kill everyone else in the city that wasn't Muslim, and then like launching their heads over the walls at the Crusaders.
Yeah. So, the people during the siege react and are like, all right, we're gonna get rid of everybody who is, yeah. Yep. So there's a lot of death and destruction here. There's a lot of death and destruction in here. And does Fulcher of Chartres, does he seem sad when he wades through knee-high blood of women and children? No, not at all. Not at all. I will also point out this guy was a chaplain. He's a chaplain, so he's like a priest, and he worked for Baldwin of Edessa. So they first are the people who went up and like started the kingdom of Edessa, and then later went on down to Jerusalem. It's just like, what are you doing? There's one incident that I want to point out because it actually comes up again in one of the other accounts. They are besieging the city of Jerusalem, and a certain man found a lance in a hole in the ground. And this man said it was the very lance with which the side of Jesus was pierced on the cross. And so they thought that having this lance, they would then, you know, they would have this good thing happen. But, you know, it ultimately gets proven it's not a real lance. And so that it's a whole, there's a whole thing about it. There's a whole thing about it. And we're going to get this again from a different perspective. So, Fulcher of Chartres, not very favorable to any of the other groups, just going and like killing all the people and being like, it's for God, it's for God. Surely murdering all these people will cause God to take away our sins, because that's how that works in the Bible. Okay. All right, second group. The second group read an account of the First Crusade according to an Islamic historian, Ibn al-Athir. He was part of the Second and Third Crusades. He was part of the train of Salah ad-Din. And so he's not an eyewitness to the First Crusade, but he's writing an account of the Second and Third Crusades, and he's wanting to fill in what happened during the First Crusade. Okay? So those of you guys who read this one, why does he describe that the First Crusade is happening? According to him, why is this happening? Anyone in this group? What did you write on your paper? Nobody wants to talk? You can do it. I believe in you. What did you write on your paper under number 3?
He talked a lot about how they wanted access to the African coast and things like that, so they could go through all these countries to get like provisions and things like that for his army.
Okay, so he talks about the need for resources, the desire for trade. So they're talking about this. He also suggests, hey, maybe actually the Islamic power in Egypt was complaining about the Seljuks and wrote to Europe for help. Maybe that happened, but he says, but God knows best. Maybe that happened, maybe that didn't happen. There's this wonderful account at the beginning of what he has to say, where he's talking about the King of France, who had the King of Sicily, who is originally a Frenchman, okay, who basically was talking to Baldwin, who was later Baldwin of Edessa. He took over Edessa later. And they're having this whole conversation about what they should do and how they should move into the area and whether they want the African coastline. I want to just read you this brief comment that he makes about King Roger of Sicily, okay? Roger called together his companions and consulted them about these proposals. They declared this is a good idea. At this, Roger raised one leg and farted loudly and swore that it was of more use than their advice. He's like, this is stupid. We shouldn't go and try to attack Africa. That's so far away. It's going to cause all these problems. You guys are stupid. And so then he's like, if you want to go make war on the Muslims rather than attacking Africa, just go invade Jerusalem instead. Okay? How does the writer of the Muslim account, how does he feel about the other groups in the region? The other groups involved in the Crusades? What do you guys think? Does he say anything about the Byzantine Emperor? Does he talk about them at all? Not a lot, right? Yeah.
Emperor of the. He wanted the Franks to go to Jerusalem and, but originally they wanted to go to Syria. But so to get to the passage, they said like, oh, to come through, Byzantine Empire, you have to go.
Okay, yeah. So he's talking about how, the Byzantine emperor is kind of not too sure. Like, he kind of wants the help of the Crusaders, but kind of not. He doesn't want them too close. He's like, go here, but not there. It's this whole kind of thing about it. And does he have a very good viewpoint of the Europeans, who he calls the Franks? Does he like them? No. Why doesn't he like them? What's his problem with them? Yeah. Yes. They're just coming in, they're invading, they're killing everybody. Multiple times he talks about them approaching Muslim towns and stuff, and the Muslim inhabitants are surrendering or they're like trying to flee for their lives, and the Franks just kill them anyway. So, very negative viewpoint on them. Okay. Anything else that like jumped out at you guys about his account you thought was surprising or interesting or shocking? One thing that I think is interesting, is he the one who also talks about the lance? Yes, he does. He's the other one who talks about this whole thing with the lance. And there was also a holy man who had great influence over the Franks, the Europeans, a man of low cunning, who proclaimed that the Messiah had a lance buried in the Kusyan, a great building in Antioch, and if you find it, you'll be victorious. Now, before saying this holy man had buried a lance in a certain spot and concealed all trace of it. So then he digs it up and basically uses it to say that they're going to win the battle in that area. Yeah. That's a great question. So a lance, it's like a spear, but it's meant to be used from horseback. Yeah. Usually. Yeah. So according to the New Testament, when Jesus was being crucified on the cross, he had already died, and the Romans, his people were coming and being like, can we take his body and bury him yet? Because he is already deceased. And the Romans are like, is he dead already? And so one of them takes a lance and just like, and yeah, like blood and water are coming out because after you die, it starts to separate into the, anyway, you don't want to hear that. But anyway, this is the lance that is getting brought up in these stories. They're like, we found the lance. It was randomly in Antioch, and we can use it as an excuse to take over this random city. Anyway. Anything else that jumped out at you guys from the account of Ibn al-Athir? Yes.
Was it, I think in like the first couple of pages, were people like sacrificing themselves before they were attacked? Is that what was going on? Or were they just being
So sometimes it was quite common in these accounts to find that people in besieged cities would kill their wives and children if they thought they were imminently going to lose the siege and then themselves, because otherwise terrible things happen to everyone. And they're like, it's better to just be dead and not endure that and probably die anyway. Yeah. Yep. All right. What about the account of Princess Anna Komnena of the Byzantine Empire? According to her, why is the crusade happening? What do you guys think? In the two back rows there. Yes.
Starts out with people of France who told that they need to liberate Jerusalem. Like that, they go through like the Byzantine Empire, and it's a little confusing because some other people became involved. There's a lot of deadly like killing and torture and very good stuff.
Yes, that's accurate. So the Europeans come over and they are coming through the Byzantine Empire, and they're actually like plundering the Byzantine Empire as they come through it and like stealing the stuff of the ordinary people who live there. And then they finally do get into kind of the Seljuk regions. But you're right, there is a lot of really unpleasant stuff that Anna is describing here. Yes, absolutely. How does Anna feel about these European crusaders? Is she glad that they've arrived? Do the Byzantines in general seem to be glad that the Europeans are there? They're like, you guys are so trustworthy and all Christians, we believe in you. Yeah.
And like we were kind of discussing how that was just sort of fueled by like her anger with the side that's like being raided. So like like an influx of like rage that's kind of thing like what she's saying. There's no thought.
Yes, she's very upset with them. She's like, these guys are barbarians. They're plundering us. They're completely unreliable. They break their agreements all the time. They're just like, why? We don't want them here. She talks about her father dreading their arrival, knowing. So Alexius dreaded their arrival, knowing as he did their uncontrollable passion, their erratic character, and their irresolution. Not to mention the other peculiar traits of the Celts. That's how she's going to refer to Europeans. With their inevitable consequences, their greed for money, which always led them to break their own agreements. Like, she really does not like them either. She's really not in favor. Do we ever get a sense of how she feels about the different Islamic groups in the region? Yes. Yeah. So she does think they're dangerous. She is very much aware, hey, these Seljuks of Rum, they're attacking us. She's very aware of that. Absolutely. Anything else you guys noted about how she talks about them? Okay. So here we have three different accounts of the First Crusade by three different people who all clearly feel quite strongly about the situation. None of them seem terribly happy about the other groups who are involved. Okay. We, of course, can have our own thoughts about like nobody in this situation was perfect. Like if the more you get into the history, the more you see that. But like it seems that the majority of the fault here is on the Europeans, in my opinion. All right. So we've talked a bit about this, but in Fulcher of Chartres' account, he kind of talks about what the Pope says about why they should do this crusade, right? And he's like, you should do this because Christians are being harmed, and also because this will be a good deed. This will be a good deed to take back the Holy Land and kill people who aren't Christians. That'll be a good deed and will make God like you better. Have you read the Bible? Anyway, leaving that aside, what do you guys think you kind of have to believe about humans, God, and the world in order for this to seem like a good plan? Tell your neighbor what you think. What do you have to believe about the world?
We ever run it down?
What do you guys think? What are some things you might have to believe about the world for this to seem like a good plan to you? What do you get? What did you talk about? Yeah.
You have to, those not, yeah, basically believe that the Pope is infallible, that he speaks for God and not be wrong about that.
Okay, so you have to really believe in the authority of the Pope. He can speak for God. He is the one who can kind of tell you what's right and what's wrong. I'll point out that during this period in Europe, most people are illiterate. They cannot themselves read the Bible. And even if they can read, it might not help them because the Bible's pretty much all the copies are in Latin. So if you don't read Latin, you're stuck. In fact, studies within the last 30 years have shown even most of the low-level priests of the time in Europe could not read Latin. So the number of people who could even actually read the Bible and see what it had to say about anything was very limited. So it's all very much dependent on what do people tell you is in there about what you should do. And they're thinking, hey, the Pope, he's in charge of the church. He wouldn't lie to us about what the Bible says. He is going to correctly interpret what's in there and about what we should do. So they're going to trust, and they're like, all right, if he says it, I guess it must be so. What else do you have to believe about the world for this to seem like a good idea? Yes.
You see the world as opportunity, since you believe that, like, due to the hopes, where that you get good deeds for killing those, and I guess like strengthen Christianity even more.
Yeah, you're like, hey, this is a great opportunity. It can be a good deed for us to kill all these people because we're strengthening Christianity. So obviously that must be a good thing. Okay. So this isn't the same worldview we have today, right? Like this isn't how we're thinking normally. Now, I will say, during the Crusader period, there were many people who argued against the Crusades. So it's not like everybody in Europe was on board with this. So some of them argued against the Crusades for better reasons, some for worse reasons. Here's just an example from on criticisms of crusading by Humbert of Roman. There are those who say that although we have a duty to defend ourselves against the Muslims when they attack us, it does not seem we ought to attack their land or their people when they leave us in peace. It's like, if they're not attacking us, maybe we shouldn't attack them. Apparently, this was very controversial. It's a very controversial statement. Other people are asking, what's the point of this attack on the Muslims? For it doesn't motivate them to convert to Christianity, but stirs them up against Christianity. And when we win and kill them, we just send them to hell, which doesn't seem very nice. So people are also putting this out. They're like, within the framework of Christianity, this doesn't really seem to be a sensible thing to do. And there were many other criticisms that were being made. However, ultimately, the Crusades are still happening. So let's talk a little bit about the Second and Third Crusades. And as we do this, I want us to keep thinking about the question, to what extent are these really religious wars? And to what extent is that just an excuse? Okay, so let's talk about the Second and Third Crusades briefly. The Second Crusade basically has its flashpoint in 1144. The Muslim ruler of Mosul and Aleppo, so he's in this region, he besieges the capital of Edessa here and takes that city. So we remember, like, the people who went up to Edessa, these were some of the nastiest people involved in the First Crusade. And they just randomly went up to Edessa. Like, it clearly has nothing to do with trying to get to Jerusalem. They're just like, let's have a kingdom. We want a kingdom. So the Muslim ruler of Aleppo takes the city of Edessa. So the Crusader king of Edessa then writes to Europe and is like, help me out. I'm being attacked. The new pope, a guy named Innocent, a little ironic, asks a famous monk named Bernard of Clairvaux to preach a second crusade, to basically call on people to go do another crusade. And basically, Bernard goes through and he's like, don't just pray to God about the situation. Cover yourselves with shields. The sound of weapons, the dangers, the labors, the fatigues of war are the penance that God imposes on you. So God is calling you to go on this crusade. Hurry to atone for your sins by victory over the unbelievers. So once again, we have this idea, we can atone for our sin, we can reconcile with God by fighting non-Christians. And let the deliverance of holy places be the reward of your repentance. If you were told that an enemy had invaded your cities, your castles, your lands, had assaulted your wives and daughters and defiled your temples, who among you wouldn't pick up weapons? Well then, all these disasters and still greater disasters have fallen upon your brothers, the family of Jesus Christ, which is yours. So he's basically saying this terrible stuff, this has happened to our Christian brothers in Edessa. So we need to go help them out. God has charged me to announce to you he will punish those who do not defend him against his enemies. Well, there's something rather big that's being left out of this call, or maybe several rather big things being left out of this call. Why are there Christian brothers in Edessa to be attacked in the first place? Because they invaded the place a couple decades ago and killed all the people who were there. And invaded their cities and castles and lands and assaulted their wives and daughters and defiled their temples. But now it's happening to supposedly to Christians, although anybody who ever met Baldwin of Edessa would be like, So he's like, so you guys need to go. You guys need to address this. Well, the German and French armies come for this crusade, but they end up running into all sorts of problems. They basically lose all of their supplies. They get delayed again. And finally, the Byzantines kind of resupply them, primarily to get them to stop plundering the Byzantine countryside. They're like, here, have some stuff, head towards Jerusalem. Supposedly, this was about Edessa and about rescuing Edessa. They don't go to Edessa. The Byzantines are like, Jerusalem, go away from us. We don't want you guys up here. So then they go down towards Jerusalem, but they get distracted on the way and they're like, let's go conquer Damascus. So they go there instead and besiege the city, and then they fail to conquer it because it's very well fortified, and they decide to go home. It's just like, what are you doing? What are you even doing? Supposedly it's about Edessa, but then you're going to Jerusalem, but then you're going randomly attacking Damascus, and then you're going, it's like, what are you even doing? Now, at this point, we get a very important figure on the Islamic side. Al-Nasir Salah al-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, usually known in English as Saladin or Salah ad-Din, he was at first a powerful general who worked for the Shia Fatimid Caliphate of Egypt. So he was a very powerful and well-known general. He was fighting against the Seljuks. He was fighting against the Libyans. He was fighting against different powers. However, later on, he ends up bringing down that caliphate and becoming Sultan of Egypt. So he basically takes over Egypt on his own account, and he switches the official form of Islam there from being Shia Islam to Sunni Islam. Okay? He then worked his way up the coastline. He ends up taking over Syria, and in 1187, he besieges Jerusalem, which had been controlled by a Crusader kingdom, and he takes Jerusalem back from the Crusaders. Now, he ended up having a pretty good reputation with the local Christians because once he took the city, he allowed the Christians to leave peacefully. He's just like, you guys need to go, but take your stuff with you, just head out of here.
Wait, Syria or?
So, Jerusalem. Syria, he just takes it over and he doesn't worry about who lives there. He doesn't try to get anyone to leave. But Jerusalem, he's like, okay, the Christians, if they just stay here, they're just going to attack because it's like the Christian knights of the king of Jerusalem. And he's like, okay, you guys need to go. So he lets these European Catholic Christians who are there, he lets them go. The Greek Orthodox Christians, he just lets them keep living there. He's like, you guys aren't a problem. So then the Pope of the time sees that we've lost Jerusalem again, so he then preaches for a third crusade to go get Jerusalem back. The main players now are going to be Salah ad-Din, the Sultan of Egypt, who controls the area, Richard the Lionheart, the King of England, and then another major player was a guy named Frederick Barbarossa, who was the Holy Roman Emperor. He was very involved in the Second Crusade as well, and he gets a big army together and goes on the Third Crusade, but right before he encounters Salah ad-Din's army, he supposedly went swimming and just drowned. It's a little suspicious, but that's what all the histories say. So, okay, that's the story. But anyway, his forces are all there, and basically Richard takes over a lot of them and directs them. Now, Richard I of England, otherwise known as Richard Lionheart, who in here has watched the Disney King Arthur, not King Arthur, the Disney Robin Hood movie? The Disney Robin Hood movie where everybody's like a fox or a bear or something. You guys know the big lion that turns up at the end, who's like the king? That's Richard Lionheart, okay? So this is when we are. Richard was a very interesting guy. He actually spent most of his reign on crusade, leaving various other people like Prince John in charge of England while he was gone. This does not seem to have been a great plan, but whatever. His wars were a famously terrible tax burden on England. He just kept writing back and being like, I need more money for my army to continue the crusade. And so England went into a serious financial depression because the tax collectors just kept going around again and getting more stuff from people. And so he just bankrupted the entire country while doing his crusades. His reasons for going on crusade seem to have been pretty complicated. On one hand, he did seem to want to get Jerusalem back, but he also had some other stuff going on. So, for example, he and Philip of France hated each other's guts. They just hated each other so much. And so they both looked at each other and they're like, if one of us goes on crusade, but not the other one, when we get back, the other one will have taken over our country. So they actually make a treaty that they're both going to go on crusade so that they don't attack each other once they're gone. So that's all going on. And it doesn't really seem like he's trying to plant a kingdom over there or anything, because he actually gives Scotland its independence. They just have to pay him a boatload of money. He just gives them their independence. Is like, here, I'm going to use this money to go on crusade. And they're like, okay. Now, Richard and Salah ad-Din actually had a fairly positive relationship. They clearly respected each other. They were constantly trying to negotiate with each other about the situation. So when Richard first arrives, he takes a couple of cities along the coastline, the cities of Acre and Jaffa. But he's looking at the situation. He's like, it's going to be hard to attack Jerusalem. It's going to be hard to get that back. So he and Salah ad-Din get together and they try to negotiate a peace settlement. They're like, we're going to make a marriage alliance between our families, and then we're going to somehow set this up. So we're going to like exchange who's in charge of what, and there's going to be an exchange of money, and we can make this work out without actually having to fight a war. However, ultimately, this particular peace settlement falls through because Richard insists that when Salah ad-Din's brother marries Richard's sister, Salah ad-Din's brother has to convert from Islam to Christianity. And Salah ad-Din and his brother are not having it. So that first attempt at negotiation doesn't go through. In 1192, Salah ad-Din tries to retake Jaffa, but Richard kind of fights him off. Then they negotiate another peace settlement. This one is successful. So this time they manage to make a successful peace agreement. Richard agrees he's going to tear down the kind of Crusader walls and stuff around Ashkelon, which have like fortified it and made it a threat. And Salah ad-Din is going to let the Crusaders hold on to these coastal cities, but he's going to maintain control of the inland area and Jerusalem. And he's like, Christian pilgrims who want to come to Jerusalem, they're welcome to come. They just can't be armed, because he knows otherwise the Crusaders will just sneak in and try to retake the place. So this is the agreement that they make. Richard is pretty happy with this agreement. In 1192, he heads home for basically the first time in his entire reign, only he actually gets shipwrecked, and then he gets stuck in a basement by first the King of Austria and then the Holy Roman Emperor. And he's writing to his brother, Prince John, being like, you have to ransom me and get me out. But his brother, Prince John, and the King of France instead get money together and try to bribe the Holy Roman Emperor not to let him go. It's a whole thing. So he finally gets free and goes home to England, and he's very offended at what the King of France did by trying to keep him from getting free. So he starts a new war with France, and he ends up dying of an arrow wound. Meanwhile, back in the Middle East, Salah ad-Din gets a fever in 1193 and dies from that. And then after that, things just degenerate because both of the two main people in this peace treaty are now gone. Okay. So what do you guys think about this? To what extent were the Crusades really about religion? And what else were they about? Tell your neighbor what you think.
Yeah. But you know, it's not all people.
Yeah. David. Like they use part of it. Or. Yeah, that's just weird.
What do you guys think about this? Like, what percent of this is actually about religion, and what percent is something else? What's your kind of gut feeling about this? Do you think it's mostly about religion? Give me a thumbs up if you think this is mostly about religion. Give me a thumbs down if you're like, it's mostly not about religion. Okay, a lot of thumbs down. Yeah, that's how I feel about it too. I'm like, this seems very suspicious. This is a pretty clear case of people weaponizing religion and being like, this is our excuse to go and do terrible things. And this is a problem that has plagued human civilization throughout its history in all areas of the world, right? And this is something we're going to come and run into again as we get into the modern unit with the Middle East. So what I'd like you guys to do now, on the back of your handout, find a group of about 3 people, and each of you guys is going to pick a backstory. You're going to imagine that you're in Jerusalem in 1098, right before the Crusader army arrives, okay? And you're gonna basically tell me what you think about these potentially approaching Crusaders and what you think might happen. We're trying to kind of put ourselves in the place of the people in Jerusalem during this time and how they would feel about what's going on. So, here you are.